In the trades, pain and injuries are often seen as just part of doing the job. What if that mindset is costing us our health, our careers, and our quality of life at home? Today's guest spent over 20 years in the utilities, helping linemen and crews build strong safety cultures, where leadership, not luck, drives results.
Many leaders don't believe they're leaders. It's not about a position or title. It's about your impact and your influence.
This is the WorkReady Podcast. Dr. Kevin here, and I just want to personally thank you for being a part of this community. It means the world to us, and without you, we wouldn't exist. The only favor that I will ever ask is that you like or subscribe to the WorkReady Podcast, as this ensures that we can continue to grow this community and bring these amazing guests and conversations to you each week. Thank you so much. Now, let's get to work. Hello, I'm Dr. Kevin Rindall with the WorkReady Podcast. So happy to have you here today. We have a special guest, Dr. Maria Silva-Palacios. Maria, it's so awesome to have you on the show. You and I first connected probably like 6 or 7 years ago. You were working for a utility and I was just getting Vimosity off the ground, and we had some interactions and just immediately hit it off because I think we both have such a passion for viewing the workforce as industrial athletes, and then just also realizing how much soft tissue injuries and strains and sprains can impact people's quality of life long term. We did a live event series through Vimosity about a month ago, and we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. But Dr. Maria, welcome to the show. It's been so great to reconnect with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin. I love how we've literally gone full circle, and I am so grateful that our paths did cross after so many years. And who would have thunk, right, that it would have been at a union conference. So, I'm just going to give you a little bit more history about my work career in the utility industry. And I did spend a little over 20 years, probably 1 month shy of my 21st year career in the utility industry, and where I served primarily as a safety professional. And my job as a safety professional for the utility was to support some of the field work crews and then some of the office work crews. And then I would say 2020, somewhere around where COVID hit, I was about 2 years into my doctoral program, and I realized that the last year was just going to be a nightmare and it was really gruesome. So I decided to take an early retirement just to focus on graduating. And then once I graduated, felt like I was going to go back into the utility industry. And what I did was focus all my attention into writing this book, authoring it, publishing it, The Safe Zone, Cultivating Engagement One Leader at a Time. And that took up all my time, and it's been wonderful. And then the last year and a half or so, I've been focusing on my Ergon Culture Solutions, where I serve as an ergonomics specialist as well as a safety culture change consultant.
Congratulations. I mean, to go back and get your PhD, there's so much hard work. And I love your book too, just because
Thank you.
You didn't just do a research project. You actually rolled up your sleeves and got out there with the frontline workers, and you're able to connect with them. And I just feel like there are so many great conversations and learnings that you glean from that. Well, before we jump in, I would like to go a little bit into your backstory and also talk through some of your experience, just life experience that has shaped who you are and the work that you do today. I'm going to open up with, it's actually on page 1. So the introduction to your book, and it says, one of the central tenets of Bill George's True North is to know thyself. Mr. George asserts that as leaders, we must know, understand, and embrace who we are, including our assets and flaws equally, and then deal with them directly. Another tenet is that the journey to knowing ourselves must include our life stories, including our crucibles. Crucibles are life experiences that are often traumatic and serve as catalysts for self-actualization. And, you're very, very vulnerable in this book, and we're just jumping straight into the deep end here. But talk just a little bit about why you chose the concept of a crucible and maybe some crucibles in your life that shaped who you are today.
So, as Bill George stated in his book, is that a crucible is a catalyst to self-actualization. And I have another definition, sort of my layman's term definition, which is a crucible is a traumatic experience. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but usually a traumatic experience that has the potential of becoming something beautiful, something transformative. The It's contingent upon, though, when I said the operative word potential, is that it's all about choice. It's whether we allow our traumatic experiences to define us, shape us, mold us, and define us, and we're going to be held captive by them, or are we going to use those crucibles to be our power source? And so I chose the latter. And the crucible that resonates with me the most, that I know had the most impact in my life, was in such a profound manner, is centered around my paralyzing fear, the paralyzing fear that I had, a fear of water that I had, and especially being around bodies of water. And sometimes it wasn't just bodies of water, it was literally my shower. And it began early in my childhood when I was still living in Ecuador, and probably somewhere between the ages of 2 to 5 years of age. And the reason that that was so traumatic is that water was used as punishment. And all probably the 2 to 5 year age frame around, my formative years, up until the time that I immigrated to the United States, which was around 6 years of age. And my older brother, Victor, he is the one who recounted all of that experience for me, because I didn't have and still don't have recollection of the actual trauma. What I do and have experienced, and probably shortly after arriving in the United States, and it started manifesting in form of nightmares, was that I just had this visceral reaction to bodies of water, as I said, and even in the shower. So there were times where, even up until about 25 years ago, that I would shower and I could not allow the shower to run my face. The shower had to run to the back of my head. So I knew, okay, something's happened. And as an adult, what I started to notice is that this fear, a paralyzing fear of water, not only stayed with water, it began to transcend in other areas of my life. And that's when I realized that this paralyzing fear did shape me, it did mold me, but one step further, it began to define me, because I allowed it to penetrate into my life and it impacted the decisions that I made. And I know that in retrospect, I passed up so many wonderful opportunities based on the fear. And so around 2012, my older brother, he was an avid triathlete. And he had asked me many, many years, over and over and over again, if I would please participate in a triathlon with him. And that was on his bucket list. And I said, as usual, absolutely not. Resounding no, you're crazy. You know that I can't, and you know why I can't. I can't swim. And he said, well, I think it's time. And the way that he said that was so impactful to me, because he knew my story. Obviously, he witnessed it. And he knew how that fear was wreaking havoc in my life, and he said to me, it's time. And it was he's a psychotherapist, so he knew exactly what he was doing. And then he said to me, I have gifted you, because my birthday was coming up, I have gifted you 5 swimming lessons with a personal coach. And I want you to take it, because the triathlon, by the way, is in 3 months. And
No pressure.
No pressure, right? It's only 3 months. And then I said, well, I'll do it. I took the challenge, but I said, she better be, this swim coach better be a therapist, because it's the only way I'm going to get through it. Well, the time came. I took the 5 lessons. It was horrific. That's a whole nother book, I think. But I got through it. And then I focused on those 3 months. I signed up at the local YMCA, and all I needed to do was swim like 16 or 18 laps. And I focused on that. So the first triathlon was in a pool. So I just, joined the gym, joined the Y, swam on my own, free swimming. And all I wanted to do was do 16 to 18. And I did. At the end of the 3 months, we completed the triathlon together. And my only other caveat for doing this, I said, you have to stay with me, because he was a fish. He was an avid triathlete. And I said, you have to finish with me. And he promised that he would, and he did. And there was nothing more joyful than crossing that finish line with my brother and knowing everything that, I had been through. And then, flash forward, I've participated in 7 triathlons, and the ocean ones are my favorite.
As a safety leader, you have more risks to cover than hours in the day. That's where Vimosity comes in. We give you one platform to scale your impact, delivering expert curated safety campaigns on everything from slips, trips, and falls to heat stress and soft tissue injury prevention. You'll reach every crew through the channels they already use, while gaining data insights to guide smarter prevention. With Vimosity, you can boost awareness, prevent serious incidents, and keep your workforce ready for the job. Scan the QR code or visit vimosity.com to learn how leading utilities are cutting injuries by 50%. That is such a wonderful story, and I'm going to hold up the book here, Safe Zone, and you can see your picture on the front cover. You're standing in open water, you're putting your goggles on, and I mean, even for people without that backstory, open water swimming can definitely be something that is challenging and terrifying for some, but just incredible job facing your fears, facing your past, and working through that. I love one of the concepts that you talk about one buoy at a time. And for those who've never done a triathlon before, I've done a lot of triathlons over the last 20 years. Swimming for me is one of the harder parts, just because it's a chaotic environment. I mean, you've got people kicking and splashing, and you're just trying to, again, get one buoy at a time. But can you explain that concept of what it's like to be in an open water swim, and the idea of one buoy at a time, but then also how you took that metaphor and brought it into other areas of your life?
So you're right. The cover of my book is a watermark picture of one ocean triathlon that I participated on. I was just putting my goggles on. I was about to swim to the start. And so that one buoy at a time concept, which eventually really became my mantra for every challenge that I was faced with and decided to overcome, that one buoy at a time started because my husband would attend and actually participate in some of the triathlons with me. And one triathlon specifically, in fact, it's that one that's in the picture, we arrived at the triathlon, and I immediately looked at the ocean buoys, and I became overwhelmed, and I was already getting in my head. And I was beginning to feel that visceral reaction, and just every physiological and emotional response was there. And so my husband, of course, knew my story. And what he did is he took me to the shore, and he said, I know that you're only focusing on how much and the distance that you have to swim. But he made a point of pointing to the first buoy. And he said, all you have to do is swim to that first buoy. And then at that buoy, if you decide you have to have a mental breakdown and cry, do whatever you need to do it, and regroup, regain your composure, and keep going. And then just go one buoy at a time. And, that was so profound that it was his usual pep talks. He would just kick it off with, you're dynamic, you're going to do this, you're a force, force to be reckoned with, blah, blah, blah. But when he said that one buoy at a time, I said, I can do this. And sure enough, I did swim to the first buoy. I had a mental breakdown, cried, held on. And much like what you had shared with me, is I started hearing the roaring of the ocean, of the swimmers that were coming up behind me. And so I had to really block that out. So I did exactly that, Dr. Kevin, was I swam to the first, then the second. And I'll tell you, I think maybe halfway of the swim leg, I got into my zone. I just got into my zone. I felt myself gliding through the ocean, and I was breathing, and everything was great. And then I finished the swimming portion and went to my strengths, which are the cycling and the running. So, and how I've utilized that concept or my mantra of buoy to buoy is any challenges that I face in my life, and even, working through my doctoral program, writing the book, it presents challenges. And I just remember one buoy at a time. So in school, in the doctoral program at USC, I would get the syllabus, right? And I would look at it and I would become overwhelmed. And I immediately remembered the swimming portion. And so I took that buoy to buoy mantra and applied it in everything. And so far it's worked.
Absolutely love that, because when you look at the stats that are related to people finishing a triathlon, the people who tend to drop out, it's usually in the first 200 meters of a swim, and it's getting past that initial fear, and it's like, okay, I can do this, and that's when people are able to do it. And I would say that that probably happens in a lot of areas in life when we try something new. If we try to start a business, or we,
Right.
start a new job, it's like there's so many things that feel overwhelming in that initial stage. And if you can keep that one buoy at a time mantra, it's remarkable. So I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk about how some of these life experiences, triathlon, your life growing up in Ecuador, has shaped you as a leader?
Absolutely. I think this is the beautiful nature of, number one, confronting, bracing, acknowledging our crucibles, and how they have impacted our life for the good and the bad, right? In general, though, I am speaking about how it negatively impacted me. And I believe that it has helped me meet people where they are in my leadership journey, because I had to meet myself where I was. I had to extend grace. I had to understand, extend empathy to myself, which was really difficult because I grew up with, especially my mother, who was extremely like hardcore. It was, you got to get up early, and it was the early bird catches the worm, and you have to be structured. And, the first thing she made us do was make our bed. And it was just very structured, um, very harsh, not very nurturing. And so I, learning to swim, confronting my crucible, I had to realize that I had to take care of me first in terms of, as I mentioned, being gracious to myself and extending that grace. Because what happens, Dr. Kevin, is that if people who have not worked through their traumatic experiences, usually that lack of self-awareness, the lack of the emotional intelligence component, is that we tend to project that onto others. And so just as I was treated so harshly, I had very little empathy and grace for people because I didn't have it for myself. And so I don't say that I overcame my fear of swimming. I believe I learned to navigate it, pardon the pun. I learned to navigate, and as what I've learned from it is extend grace to myself, which now helps me extend grace to others, have empathy toward myself, which now I have empathy to others. And in the leadership position, when we're working with different personalities, the dynamics of a group is that we have so many unique personalities, and not everyone was brought up the way that we're brought up. And not everyone has the same priorities that we have. And so it taught me to meet people where they are and be very gracious. And
That's
also
great.
understand that everybody has a crucible.
Yeah, and along those same lines, like some people may not realize that they have a crucible. Like it's present, but they just haven't identified that that
Yes,
was part of their life experience, and so
right.
they're living not realizing that that's something that maybe they need to address or deal with or confront that crucible. What would you say to people who maybe are in that type of a situation where there is a crucible that they just haven't identified yet?
I think my number one suggestion would be just take an inventory of your life, see how people respond to you. I think that was also a huge learning lesson for me was um, our impact. What our behavior not only impacts ourselves, our behavior impacts all of those around us, family and work. So my suggestion is first really take an inventory of your life and be honest, like literally be brutally honest with yourself in the mirror. The other thing that I think is really helpful is I think that we all need truth tellers in our life. We need people who we trust and who have our best interest in their heart and that are willing to also be courageous and tell us with a gentle tap and all with in the spirit of contribution and growth and grace and love and empathy and even forgiveness is just to tell us a little bit about ourselves, something that we don't know about ourselves, right? To bring those blind spots to our awareness, and so we can be aware of it. So then we can make that decision if we're going to challenge them or not. My husband and I have a joke. We go back and forth where he says, "Are you going to tell me a little bit about myself that I don't know about myself?" And I said, "Yep, absolutely." And he'll do the same. And so I think it's important that we are calling each other out in a very loving manner, especially when we see and we witness that our behavior is impacting people negatively. So he'll always say, "Oh yeah, my wife says that, because he'll say, I've been doing this all my life." And then my response is, "Oh, and is that working for you?" And he's like, "No." So he's done that to me as well. So I think that's important to have that group of people, the group of people who are willing to be courageous and let you know.
Yeah, I love that. And until we're ready to embrace the truth, we can't change. And it's one of the hardest things to do in life. So I really appreciate that. You had started to talk about leadership. What is your definition of a leader?
One, well, for me, excuse me, is a leader sets the tone for everything, right? The leader must lead with empathy. A leader must know each of their employees, knows what makes them tick, knows what motivates them. I believe that a leader needs to have the ability to be vulnerable with their employees. The more a leader is aware of who they are and is willing to work, like live and what's that saying? Wear your heart on your sleeve, right? And be just a real person. I think it gives the employees, the workforce, a space to feel real. And I often tell executive leaders who may or may not have a lot of emotional intelligence, and I'll say, I'll bring to their, forefront of their brain that there is something called positionality, and a leader already steps into a place with power, and employees automatically feel a little bit of intimidation around their leaders. So when leaders are aware of this and they can tone it down a little bit and just be real, it provides that space of psychological safety where an employee feels like they can speak up, that person humanizes the leader. So I think that's important for a leader to have that self-awareness and to lead in that way. Vulnerability. And then I can't say enough about empathy, and just meeting your workforce where they are. Everybody has a different emotional threshold. And I think a great leader, transformational, authentic leader, knows how to motivate each of their employees and bring the best out of them. So we can go on and on and on about this one.
And we are. That's the thing that I loved about your book is, the whole second half of the book is about authentic leadership. Uh, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this topic, but let's even talk about just the frontline workers. We're all leaders to an extent. I've heard the definition from John Maxwell. He says that leadership is influence, and we all have influence on each other. And so we all have the ability to influence others. And
Yeah.
um, what would you say to those people who maybe don't see themselves as leaders, but they have a tremendous influence just on the people around them, on the crews that they're working with day in and day out?
I often come across this in conversations with leaders, regardless of the level, the direct leader, middle management, and all the way up to executive leadership. And it really boggles my mind that many leaders don't believe they're leaders, even though they have the title and the position. So, what I encourage them to think about is that leadership isn't about a position or a title. It's about your impact and your influence. And I encourage the leaders to think about that. If they're even just overseeing one person, but they have influence over that person, they care, and within the safety space, if they care about that person's safety, then they're already leaders. You're already leading. So the focus is so, in our culture, I think it is so much on a leader is someone that has a title and a position. And I completely disagree with that mindset, and just focus on how much impact do we have? Do we have impact and influence on people? And if we do, then we're leading.
Yeah. Earlier in this conversation, you used the term psychological safety. Can you go into that?
Yes. And I'm going to reference the space of tailboard forms, for example, which is a critical foundational safety protocol for frontline workers, is having their tailboard, whether it's right at their truck or right before they leave the work site. And psychological safety is, as you know, is employees who feel that they are not only being heard, but they're valued. And that causes an employee to feel safe enough to speak up, regardless of the issue, whether it's an incident, that a near miss, or an actual incident, a mistake. And so it just levels the playing field for everyone to be themselves, to be real, and to speak up without any fear of retribution. So when that happens, especially within the process of a tailboard form, think about a person, especially an apprentice, right? The lowest guy on the totem pole, right, in the hierarchy. If that apprentice feels safe to bring up a topic, or perhaps a potential hazard that wasn't captured on that tailboard form, if that person can bring that up and feel safe to do so, imagine the quality of dialogue, safety dialogue, that can happen and can happen, well, and does happen when there is that psychological safety. And then also it empowers people and it powers teams to have better dialogue, and also just make better safety decisions. There's so many, I have been in so many incident investigations, Dr. Kevin, that when I would ask questions to the person who was technically at fault. And if I framed the question, did you know that what you were about to do was not safe? And the resounding answer was always, I did. And so my next question was, what kept you from speaking up? And I would say 90% of the time was I just felt that I couldn't. I didn't want to go against my foreman. I didn't want to speak out of authority. So it took me back to, wow, it's the power of psychological safety is so underrated. And so it can prevent safety incidents and even fatalities.
For sure, and I think you hit on that's probably one of the driving factors of why serious injuries and fatalities continue to happen. I mean, if we're gonna get to zero SIFs, it's gonna take that psychological safety, and it's gonna take people speaking up. And sometimes it's a fresh set of eyes that tends to really expose some of the opportunities that exist in the way we've always done it, just quote unquote, because
Mm-hmm.
that fresh approach is so helpful for people to just say, hey, why are we doing it this way? There's got to be
Mhm.
a better way, or we've got to maybe rethink that. So do you mind and actually, this is a great pivot point to now going into the research. Can you expand on, maybe give us some context of your research that went into the book that you wrote in your PhD, and just give us some context of who you spoke with to conduct the research, and how things like psychological safety, some of these themes emerged from those conversations.
So my book is the narrative version of my doctoral dissertation. And my doctoral dissertation title was Engaging Employees in Injury Prevention Programs. And where that title came from was from my experience in the utility industry over the course of over the 20 years. And because of my undergrad degree in kinesiology, I was always put in committees that were designed and aimed at reducing the soft tissue injuries in a company. And so I, over 20 years, saw many wonderful programs come through, many not so wonderful programs come through. But the bottom line was, the common theme throughout the 20 years was lack of engagement, lack of participation. And because I was always involved either in creating programs, facilitating programs, bringing in a vendor to facilitate these programs and implement them and execute them, it was always the same. It was always, we were back at square one. There was this awesome momentum in the beginning, and then like clockwork, it would just plummet. And I always attribute it to, people who go to the gym in January, the New Year's resolution, right? Everybody's on top and everybody wants to have these goals and resolutions. And then 2 months in, they drop. And so that's what I was equating that with. And so I became very frustrated, very, very frustrated with why was this occurring? And so when it came time to choose my doctoral dissertation topic, one of my mentors said, you need to really make sure that the topic that you choose is going to be something that you are so passionate about, because you're going to do a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of writing. So by then, I have a master's degree in leadership and management, and I got bit by the leadership bug, and I wanted to know more. And I had this background and history in health and fitness and safety, so I wanted to merge the two. And so what I did is, I sought out to interview the workforce, the linemen who had 80% of those soft tissue injuries, and also the linemen in the different areas who had the least participation. So I went about having my qualitative study. I interviewed them, and I'll tell you, the findings were, I already knew. I knew going in, but it was that gut feeling that I knew, plus my experience. And it was amazing to have now the research, the interview, the studies confirm that all arrows pointed to leadership. And so yeah, that's how this came about.
And just to ground us again, so your thesis was, companies implement soft tissue injury prevention programs or some type of safety initiative, and what causes them to either succeed or fail. And, I oftentimes hear like the flavor of the month program, and, like you said, that people become disengaged quickly. And what you're
Mhm.
saying is that the common theme goes back to the leadership support of these. But just for our audience, can you ground us on why soft tissue injury prevention is such a critical piece? I mean, maybe give us some stats in terms of like what percentage of injuries in the workforce involve soft tissue injuries, because it's a huge, huge problem.
In my career, my 20-year career, it would fluctuate. The soft tissue injuries at one point in time dropped to 40%, but it would escalate to 80%. So somewhere in that range of 40 to 80% of the company's injuries were all soft tissue related. As I delved deeper into my doctoral research and study, I realized and discovered that research indicated that approximately 70% of companies have some form of health, wellness, injury prevention programs in place. But the other startling stats were that less than 50% of employees engage. And I go back to, where does it start? It really begins with leadership, and leadership sets the tone. So that's what it's just been ongoing. I mean, there were times, as I mentioned, there were times where it would drop, and then there were times that it peaked. So there was a fluctuation, but there was it was a constant in the 20 years, a constant of the soft tissue injuries leading in that particular company.
And most of our listeners know, I mean, I spend all day, every day working on soft tissue injury prevention with primarily utility companies. And it's pretty staggering, the statistics, because when we even look at like the percentage of the workforce that's in pain, like over 80% of them report that they're experiencing pain multiple days per week at a rate of 4 to 6 out of 10 on that scale. When you're at 4 to 6 out of 10, that means like your quality of life is being impacted. It's in the back of your mind. You're thinking about every time you bend down, when you reach up. It's starting to impact your ability to do things outside of work. I oftentimes hear people say, hey Kevin, have you ever heard of the Snickers commercial? You're not yourself when you're hangry. Well, that's the way that I am when my back hurts. Like, I'm just not the same person. It impacts, my relationship with my kids, the way I'm at home. I get short with my coworkers. So pain and these soft tissue injuries, it's just such an overwhelming problem. And what I've just always been baffled by is why people are resistant to doing things that are going to help offset that, protect them, help them feel better. Because, I mean, just for instance, we did a survey last year with 3,400 people who participated in the program that we initiate. 90% of them, just by doing 3 to 5 minutes a day, say that they reduce the amount of pain, stiffness, and soreness and experience an increased quality of life just by doing simple mobility activities, rolling, breathing, moving. It's not a crazy amount of stuff. Why are frontline workers oftentimes so resistant to doing something like that, especially even when the time is given to them?
I attribute it to multiple cultural factors. So in my experience, right, especially in this in utility industry, is over the course of 20 years, seeing programs come and go and nothing really stuck, right? Nothing really stuck. Nothing was really sustainable. And employees see that. And so it becomes a trust issue because employees now don't trust that the leaders really care about them. It's more about check off the list. We have an initiative that we have to address. There's been X amount of injuries, and so it's very reactionary, and they just check off the list and they roll out a program without really being strategic about it. And so when the workforce sees this over and over and over again, it disrupts the trust that they have. And then coupled with already other cultural issues, perhaps there's a focus on a leader could say, proclaim safety first, and then their behavior is completely contradictory to that. That erodes trust. And when employees just do not feel valued, heard, seen, and really truly cared about, it lowers the engagement. And unfortunately, these are the cultural factors that dictate behavior. So that, in my experience and in my research, is that was the number one reason, is just unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but it can change. I just think that it really requires the type of leadership that is willing to roll their sleeves up and say, okay, I'm in this, I'm in it with you. We care about you. It's not just about the money. It's not about cost. It's not about production. It's not about emergent work. safety is truly first, and the safety of our employees comes first over productivity, cost, ROI, et cetera.
So, what I'm hearing you say that there's almost like people are a little bit callous to the idea because they're like, "Oh, we've seen 10 of these initiatives come and go. It always goes back to the same thing. We have an increase in injuries, and now the company's just trying to save money. They're implementing this program, or they just want to check the box." Is that kind of the attitude that you hear?
Yeah. I mean, when I was interviewing the linemen, the workforce, that's exactly what they said. They said, we've been through so many programs, what's next? Why didn't the last one stick? And it erodes that trust. It erodes that trust. And think about it. I mean, if we think of our own experience, right? If we've experienced the all talk, no action, then there's no alignment between the words and actions. People just have a tendency not to trust, and there's no difference in the workforce.
What role does education and giving people the bigger picture why play a part in the success of any initiative? Like when you really take the time to educate employees that this is for them, for their benefit, and then it's backed up by the actions from the leadership that this truly is for you. It's not a check the box. Like, can you expand on that?
It is critical to explain the why. I think over the course of my time as a safety professional, there was so much focus on the what and the how, which is very transactional, and it is compliance based. And that is necessary, especially in the utility industry. Sometimes it is necessary to focus only on compliance because people could suffer a serious injury or fatality. However, I think for initiatives such like a soft tissue injury reduction initiative is that there must be a marriage of compliance with cooperation, because with that, then there's higher engagement, there's higher shared accountability. There's also, it connects the task with the purpose. So it connects the program, the task of their job with the purpose of the company, the mission of reducing, soft tissue injuries, for example, or just keeping our employees safe. So it is important and critical to focus on the why and not just the what and the how, because the why is the transformative element. And that when it is done correctly and focused on the why, programs, any program, any initiative has, I think, a higher success rate, and it'll be more sustainable.
Yeah, thank you for that response. In your research, did you find among the linemen that you interviewed a perspective of, well, being broken down is just part of the job. This is, you get to the end of your career and you're broken down. That's what we've seen, generation after generation. And
Yeah.
there's just kind of that mindset of that is what you should expect if you're in the trades.
All the time. I mean, I could say that from the very, very beginning, I don't even know if you know this about me. I started in this utility industry. I was hired by one of the safety representatives in transmission distribution to go to the locations, the different locations in the different districts. And I was the flex coach, stretch and flex coach. And so I started with one district, 5 locations, and I would go every day to lead them in a 15-minute, real quick movement to address the concerns of strains and sprains. And so I immediately saw and I witnessed that these guys who were climbing poles, climbing towers, getting into these awkward positions for an extended period of time, repetitive motions, all of these factors, they were in pain. And I quickly realized that they had normalized that culture of pain. They had normalized the culture that being broken down is an occupational hazard. It just comes with the job. And so, funny story is that I was quickly called Pollyanna, because here I was, no, you don't have to be in pain. I can really help you. And I had this vision of them living a pain-free life. And they were just like, oh, you know what you were talking about? I've done this all my life. And my question to them was, how in the heck do you climb a pole and climb towers, et cetera, do this difficult work, and you can't even do this? And they said, we just get through it. And it's true. Our bodies will do whatever it takes to get through it. Now, is that the healthiest option? No, definitely not. But yeah, it was just a normalization of the pain culture, and that we're broken down and it comes with the job. And I also started looking into the research of linemen, the life expectancy. And on the average, linemen didn't live more than like 5 years after they retired. So I thought, you work for 30, 40 years as a lineman, destroying your body, only to enjoy 4 or 5 years? That doesn't make sense. So I think once I started to frame things that way, then it clicked. But not all of them, but it did click to many.
I've seen a shift in that mindset, especially in some of the younger members of the workforce. I connected with a guy over the weekend, and he's a lineman, and he does CrossFit like 5 days a week on top of his work. He competes in line rodeos, and he has the mindset of like, hey, I'm an industrial athlete. I'm a workforce athlete, and
Mm-hmm.
so I need to train my body specifically to continue to be able to perform at a high level. And I oftentimes hear, industrial workers say, hey, I move all day, every day. My
Mm-hmm.
job is physical. And so I get enough exercise. But can you, because you have such a fitness background, what are your thoughts around, our body probably still needs some specific inputs to strengthen different areas of our body so that we can maintain mobility, so that we can, maintain balanced strength throughout our body to, increase our longevity. Can you maybe go into that?
Yes, and I came across that the entire 20 years I was there. Is I would hear, I don't need to do this because I go to the gym before coming to work. And my answer was always the same, which was, yes, you do this line of work, you do this type of job. However, are you truly focusing on all of the elements of moving correctly? The flexibility, the mobility, the strength, all of the components. And honestly, Kevin, there were guys who, yes, worked out prior and maintained their bodies and what have you, but the majority didn't, because the work was so brutal on their bodies that they didn't want to go to the gym, especially as the aging workforce, as the guys became more seasoned, and there was a mindset of, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to go get it done, and then I'll, focus on popping a few ibuprofens and I'll be good for the next day. But I do also want to add that I agree with you. I think there is a mindset shift that's occurring, and probably more so probably the last 5, 6, 7 years, where I think the line guys are becoming more aware that it is important to take care of your body, because, someone's work can make them stronger. I agree. However, only if there's a proper program that focuses on moving correctly while they are performing their tasks, so they can continue what they're doing, because otherwise it's the other way around. Their bodies will break them. That work will break their bodies down. And then it gets to the point where they're in so much pain that even the strongest willed person cannot get through a particular task without feeling that much pain. And as you mentioned earlier, the pain is a precursor to an injury, no doubt. And I recall I think we surveyed the workforce, and they're paying kind of a figure, like, to determine their pain level. And we conducted an anonymous survey, and 50%, actually more than 50% of our workforce was in pain. And we thought, okay, so 50% of your workforce is now vulnerable to suffering a soft tissue injury.
Yeah, and again, vulnerable to experiencing a soft tissue injury because pain is the body's alarm system going off saying, "Hey, there's a problem, and if we don't fix this soon and get that inflammation dialed down, if we don't work on restoration, an injury is going to happen." And think that that's one of the big things is pain is that check engine light going off that oftentimes gets ignored, and it's like you can put tape over the check engine light, but if you just ignore it, something's gonna go wrong. And I love your point too about your work can either build you up or break you down, and it all goes back to your mobility and can you get your body in the right position to perform those job tasks, because it's just like in the gym, if you're properly positioning your body when you perform, let's say, a deadlift, you're going to become stronger, but you round
Mhm.
that back, you don't hinge at the hips. All that strain is going in the wrong spot, and it's going to break you down. So, again, it goes back to mechanics when you're performing those job tasks. I love as part of your research, you were able to see some patterns that were really strong for like high performing groups who really did take advantage of the opportunity to invest in their bodies, and they're very consistent. They saw tremendous results. Can you maybe explain some of the best practices that you saw, both in practice, but then also from a leadership perspective?
So one of the leading, or some of the leading patterns that contributed to engagement in these injury prevention programs during my tenure there was I found that the participation level was due to their perception about the value of the program, whatever program that was. And so I found that became an intrinsic motivation for many of the guys. So that was a number one pattern, was if they found value in it, then it became their intrinsic motivation, which kept them going and participating, regardless if their leadership wasn't participating, regardless if uh, the program was, the mindset was that this was a flavor of the month. The guys who really just took it to heart and participated, that intrinsic motivation value was what carried them. And during my research and when I was interviewing these guys, I was really surprised. I went in thinking these guys aren't motivated. I kind of have my bias, right? My researcher bias. And that humbled me because I realized after in interviewing the workforce that these guys were really motivated just solely from the value perspective, because they valued the program because they weren't experiencing pain. Either it had subsided or completely gone away. They valued the program because they were moving better. They valued the program because now they can go home and pick up their children, literally pick them up and be okay and enjoy their time with their kids on the weekends and be a weekend warrior. So all of these things that they shared with me was so impactful and so eye-opening that it made me realize that regardless if the leadership support wasn't there, that they were motivated. Now, on the flip side, I realized, imagine what the motivation and the participation level would be if there was that leadership support. And I just knew that it would have been different had there been more leadership support and participation in that program, because when you was as a leader, our job is to model that behavior that we desire for our organization. And everyone's different. There were some guys who were really turned off by do as I say, not as I do mindset from the leaders. And that impacted whether or not they were going to support, they were going to participate. And then there are other guys who's like, this is for me, which I go back to the ownership. They owned it.
I love the concept of perceived value, and you talk about that. Like when people realize that their efforts are having an impact, and they can correlate that with quality of life, improvements or the ability to fish, hunt, or like you said, pick up their kids without pain. Those are the things that definitely drive motivation. The people who succeed at going to the gym beyond January or February, it's because they start to see results. Maybe it's a little bit of weight loss or strength
Mhm,
gains,
mhm.
or their body looks better, they just feel better. So that recognition of the benefit, I think, is absolutely critical to the long-term motivation. I appreciated that you really honed in on that.
Can I
Can
share a
you?
real quick story?
Yeah,
Really quick
yeah,
story
please.
is that when we rolled out this one program that was there until I took my early retirement, there was a process in the beginning where there were assessments that needed to be performed. And these needs assessments, one of the guys who was relatively young, but had been in the line force for some time, but he was relatively young, had smaller children. And he tapped me on my shoulder and said, "Can I speak to you privately?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I think I may have mentioned this in my book. I don't remember, but we went to a private conference room, and he just was very transparent and vulnerable with me and said, "I'm not going to be able to do that." And of course, I thanked him for being that honest and transparent. And he said, "I have a difficult time picking up my 3-year-old child from the floor. I can bend down, but coming up is a whole different story." And my heart really went out to this guy because I realized he was exactly the culture that we had just mentioned about the normalization of pain. And so I said, "You know what? I'm going to schedule your assessment for a private one." And sure enough, I spoke to the vendor said, "Absolutely." We assessed him privately, and then word got around that they were allowed to do those private assessments. And so more guys started tapping me on the shoulder and asking me if they can do that. So I wanted to share that with you because I think it's important that, there's that culture that, we need just to suck it up. It's part of our job. And yet when they're given the space to share what they're really feeling, because I didn't frown upon him. I didn't say, "What the heck?" I didn't do anything. I didn't shame him in any way, shape, or form. I truly thanked him and then provided that extra assistance. To see other guys follow to do that really spoke volumes to me. So
And along those lines, did you find any evidence that people felt cautious about participating in like a daily warm up because they felt maybe embarrassment of doing movements in front of their peers? I mean, do you feel like that plays a role in people's resistance?
absolutely, 100%. I can't agree with you more. Yes, I witnessed it. It's part of the culture. It's part of the culture of teasing each other. And yes, it was a lot of, and I think this was the reason why this gentleman felt safe to come to me. I wasn't going to ridicule him. He knew that I was there to help and had a passion to see them become pain free. But that component of embarrassment is so high. And some of the guys, what I discovered too, Dr. Kevin, is that some of the guys would mask it by either sabotaging it, um, ridiculing it. And I realized, oh, I see what that is. They are trying to remove themselves from it because they know that they perhaps cannot perform those movements. And so, but instead of trying and looking foolish in front of their coworkers, it's better that I just ridicule the program and say that it's not going to work. So, yes, it definitely
Fascinating.
had. That was a huge factor.
What I'm sure you came across some pretty cool pockets within the organization where different groups worked past that fear of the silliness of, performing moves or assessments or daily warm up in front of others. What were some of the key components of those cultures that were able to move beyond that so that they really did have that participation? Because I think you're absolutely right. A lot of times, again, there's the fear or maybe a crucible in the past that hasn't been addressed that prevents people from wanting to do stuff. Because at the end of the day, it's like it's for everyone's benefit, but I do see that self-sabotaging mentality from time to time when I'm out there. But what were some of the best practices or the things that you saw were the key to those groups really thriving?
Well, one of the constructs that I utilized in my doctoral thesis and research was it's called the expectancy theory of motivation. And what that is a construct that helps a researcher explore what are the extrinsic and or intrinsic motivators that play a role in someone participating. And so that was one. One was, were these guys motivated enough intrinsically to participate? So that was one pattern that I saw that played a huge role in the success of a program, is the fact that they were already motivated. The second was the value that they saw. If a guy was 100% in and said, I'm going to do this, and began to experience the benefits of it, then it was a buy-in 100%. And then they sustained it. But the number one factor that will determine the success or the failure of a program such as a soft tissue injury prevention program is the leader. It's the leader and the leaders of all levels. So if that initiative is approved by the executive leadership level, then it needs to be, that why and the purpose needs to be communicated to the middle management level. And then the middle management level needs to communicate that with the other level, the frontline management level. And here's where there's a change. That frontline leadership now not only needs to engage and participate, but they need to have an enthusiasm behind that. An enthusiasm about the why, an enthusiasm about how this is designed to prevent injuries from occurring, how it's designed to have the employee be safe, go home the way that you came to work. But that enthusiasm, what I call a contagious enthusiasm, will set the tone, because and as you know, right, enthusiasm is very contagious. It's like a really great laugh, right? If somebody has a great laugh and everybody's laughing, it's the same thing. And so I think it's important for that frontline leader to know that I need to be enthusiastic, and not only in my communication of the why, but my participation. So that was the critical element that in any program, any initiative, but definitely in a soft tissue injury prevention program initiative, is got to have that buy-in and participation with your frontline workers.
Yeah, that was a huge, huge takeaway for me as I read this, because it's one thing for executives to support it, but that middle management, not only verbally supporting it, but visibly supporting any type of initiative and being present, seems to be a real critical component of long-term success. So you talk about in your book the importance of visible leadership and middle management support being like absolutely critical, and you just gave us some great examples. Can you give us an example of where you maybe saw a lack of middle management buy-in or support, and how that impacted the success of the soft tissue injury prevention initiative?
So what I noticed when I was, as a safety professional, part of my job was to visit the locations that were participating or not in these injury prevention programs. And so often I would, stop by at the time that was allotted for them. And what I quickly noticed is that, for example, the direct supervisor, meaning the foreman, and then the next level, which was the crew supervisor, in some instances it's a superintendent, depending on the industry, but they weren't in the room that was designed for them to participate and to practice their exercise movements. And what I found was that the guys were on their own. And as soon as I would walk back to the office and say, hey, what's up, guys? How come you're not out there? We have work to do. We have real work to do is what I was always told. We don't have tutus today, so there was just that frowning upon, ridiculing. And I found that in those locations where the middle management direct supervisor wasn't participating with them, there was a lower engagement. And in the areas where the direct supervisor foreman, the next level up crew supervisor was participating with them and being enthusiastic about it and showing that, the guys that this is important, not only through their words and what they were proclaiming, but through their actions, completely different. There was a higher engagement. And also I noticed an impact on their morale, because there is your supervisor who is walking the walk and talking the talk. And it saddens me that many leaders don't understand how important it is for their words and actions to align. And so that was my experience that played a huge role in whether it was successful or not.
Yeah, I've been doing this for going on 9 years now, working with companies at implementing soft tissue injury prevention programs. So that is the number one thing that we have come across. We've set out what are the leading indicators of success, in that middle management buy-in, visible leadership, and support is absolutely critical. And you have to have the executive support as well, but those frontline leaders are so critical to the success of an initiative. The other thing that I've found is crucial for long-term success as well is you have to have a regular cadence. It just has to be built into the workday. You look at every professional sports team, like no one has to put an agenda together and say, we're going to warm up before the game. It's just like, it's just part of the cadence. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
It's
so
like putting your
everybody knows
safety goggles on.
exactly. It's like, the time, the location, and the leader, and it just starts to become part of the workday. And so can you talk about just like how building systems into the day-to-day infrastructure can be really important to the long-term success of any initiative?
Yes, I'm going to piggyback on what you were saying, is that it has to be part of the daily processes and protocols, procedures related to safety. And as I'm saying this, I realized it's important to what that particular initiative is called. So I made a comment just a few seconds ago how some of the guys would call it, we didn't have our tutus on. And I realized that, and I really was trying to champion this, is to change the name from just a flex and stretch program to something else related to safety. When we had an injury prevention program, we happened to call it the stretch program. I didn't feel that it had enough impact because it wasn't synonymous with safety. So having that protocol, that processes, the systems in place that make it a safety initiative is completely different than a stretch program that is then frowned upon and then it doesn't have success. The other thing that I also witnessed, and it was part of my research, was that there needs to be, part of the systems in place needs to be a mandate around what is the expectation level here in terms of participation. I'll tell you, interviewing the linemen from all different workforce across the 50,000 square mile radius, is that some areas said, oh, it's absolutely mandatory. Well, what does that mean to you? What does mandatory mean? And mandatory had all sorts of definitions. Well, and then other locations like, nope, it's not mandatory. If we don't want to be in the room, then we can be outside and preparing our trucks ready for work. Other locations, it was interpreted as mandatory meant you can be in the room, but you don't have to actually participate. So that was a huge factor in the engagement or a lack of engagement, because it was just so loose the systems in place were very, very loose and weren't conducive to having, a program that would sustain because of that.
Clarity of expectations is absolutely critical. I find it even as a dad. I mean, if I'm doing like tell my kids to do chores, if I don't have clear expectations, it's
Mm-hmm.
like I'm
Mm-hmm.
setting them up for failure. How do companies clarify what the expectations are? Like if you were to look back on this research and really advise the utility that you're working with in that situation on how to clarify expectations related to this, what would be your takeaway?
I'm actually in that position right now as I'm serving as a safety culture change consultant, that when there isn't alignment across the board with, like, for example, transmission and distribution organizations, there's multiple leaders under each umbrella of whatever that department is that falls under transmission distribution. And the leader who's at the helm across each organization, there has to be alignment there. There has to be a "we shall do this" mentality, mindset. Because if there isn't, then it's a given that a program won't be successful. So I would say that it is just critical. I'll probably say this again, I'll sound like a broken record, is that it's critical for a leader to proclaim safety and then back it up with the actions that show that I truly do care about safety. Because otherwise, there's not an initiative that will survive in a culture that isn't conducive to engagement in any particular program.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And what I would say is, like, as we have this conversation, it's easy to have this dialogue, but then when you have 10 to 15,000 employees over, multiple states and 100,000 square, mile radius, it's like, yeah, how in the world are we going to be consistent? But I think it just is a reminder that you don't say it once, clarity happens by reiterating the message like over and over and over again.
At least 7 or 8 times, according
Yeah,
to
and just
research.
continuing to reinforce it, say it in
Mhm.
different ways, say it through different mediums and different channels. You can't stop that communication. It has to just continue to be a part of the dialogues. No, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Let's switch gears now and talk about authentic leadership. That was one of my favorite parts of your book, is really diving into that. Um, why don't you share what your definition is of authentic leadership?
When I first started exploring the authentic leadership framework, it was almost about 9 years ago. And at first I thought it was just another leadership approach, another leadership style, just much like there's transactional leadership and servant leadership and many others. But I quickly discovered that authentic leadership for me became more of a lifestyle. It became a way of life, bottom line. And authentic leadership is about leading with heart. First of all, values, but understanding and asking oneself, what are my values? And exploring what one's values are. And then once you think about them and then write them out and say, okay, these are my values. Now, living by those values and having those values become your moral compass. So then in times where you're tempted, your integrity could be sacrificed, or, could be under temptation of some kind. You're going to stick to living by your values. So for me, part of authentic leadership, as I said, it's a way of life. It includes living by my values. It's leading with heart. So not just from that space of rules and tools, but it's also leading from a place of heart. It's leading with passionate purpose. So for me, much like the contagious enthusiasm, for me, purpose has to be, passion behind the purpose. And as you know, leading from thy values, integrity, self-discipline. So all of these attributes fall under the umbrella of authentic leadership, and especially self-awareness. So self-awareness is key. And there's a term called know thyself, and Bill George mentions that in his book, True North. And I also prefaced it in my book, where the process of knowing thyself is not an easy process, especially when you have those crucibles that have defined you and shaped and molded your life. So the self-awareness key is really component. And I very committed to intentionally every day be aware of my triggers. You know, how am I being triggered, and how am I reacting as a result of my triggers? So all of those things can't happen if I don't have that self-awareness. And so that pretty much encompasses what authentic leadership is, and how I utilize it in my life and in my leadership roles.
I love that. I'm going to read a section on page 73 about authentic leadership. Because authentic leaders lead with their hearts, they serve their people with compassion and empathy and make tough decisions from an intuitive and cognitive space. As you learn to evolve into an authentic leader, you learn what your purpose is and lead from that space. However, when leaders serve without a passionate purpose, they become susceptible to leading from a place of narcissism because their leadership style is ego-driven. As an authentic leader in training, you get to learn or revisit what your core values are, and then you lead from them diligently. Authentic leaders lead from an integrity lens. Consequently, they make decisions from a place of conviction to do the right thing, even if it is difficult. Creating trusting relationships is also an essential mark of an authentic leader. Trust is the foundational ingredient for building and sustaining a positive and emotionally safe work environment. I mean, we could spend 2 hours just talking about that paragraph, but can you tell us that? To me, that kind of feels like this whole culmination of your PhD. You had all these conversations. You looked at why initiatives either succeed or fail. You looked at leadership as being like such an important part. How did you wrap that whole paragraph in? I mean, to me, it feels like a summary of your PhD. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about that and the process that you went through to get to that as like the pivotal point? It's leading from a position of integrity and
Mm-hmm.
trust.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back to when my personal journey began with authentic leadership, which was, I've said, about 9 years ago in 2016. I had my master's degree, as I mentioned, leadership and management. So I had been bitten by that leadership bug, but I was looking to further my leadership competencies. And so I hadn't contemplated a doctoral program yet, but I was definitely looking for other programs or certifications or something that had to do with improving my leadership competencies. So I happened to come across, and my paths crossed with this woman who's the founder of multiple women's executive leadership programs, Dr. Yasmin Davids. And she happened to be a guest speaker where I worked in this utility industry. And she started talking about her authentic leadership, the program that her transformative executive women's leadership program. And she started talking about authentic leadership. And so I was like, wow, I was hooked. I needed to find out more. And so I started exploring and looking her up and exploring her. And eventually I applied for the program, interviewed, and was accepted. And that pivotal moment for me, Dr. Kevin, was, wow, I am not here only to learn new technical leadership competencies. I was in that program to look inward. And I realized that all along as a leader, even after a master's degree program, even after my master's thesis was about how trust transforms an organization, I was still focusing on the wrong competencies, which was rules, policies, procedures, and I had completely dismissed and wasn't aware of how important that emotional intelligence component is in leaders, in leadership, and transforming people, transforming organizations. So I dove right in, but it was very difficult. And I had to sit back and explore and think, okay, what is my crucible? I knew it, but I hadn't really made that connection. That paralyzing fear of water that I had permeated all areas of my life. And that was the turning point for me. And I've never gone back, because I in my research shows that when a leader develops his authentic leadership style, or embeds it into his life as a life approach or lifestyle, transformation happens. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because we are focused on leading from a place of building relationships that are based on trust. And I was just having a conversation with an executive leader of a company the other day, and I said, it's pretty simple in theory. I think in practice it's more difficult, but pretty simple in theory, because we're human beings, and the bottom line is that we want to be we want to be heard, we want to be valued, we want to be respected, we want to belong. And so if a leader can consider those factors and just, be human, there's no doubt in my mind that a leader could transform people and in organizations through that style of leadership.
That's great. And what I would say is that I think this is such a great starting point for people, especially as they're trying to continue to grow and build their leadership within their organization and just everyday life. And I really am glad that we got to spend some time going over your book and having that conversation. Thank you so much for doing that research. Before we close things out, I want to talk about dungeon fitness. I think that that's such a cool thing. We had seen some references like on your LinkedIn, didn't really have a perspective of what that was. I saw your Instagram handle is dungeon fitness as well. Yeah, tell us about that. How did it start?
So Dungeon Fitness began roughly in 2015. I was new to this neighborhood and had lived all my life in another neighborhood ever since I immigrated, and never moved from there. And I was in this new area, and I really was seeking community. I was seeking to make friends. And so I was also, I used to have a fitness wear line, and I had all this extra inventory and I wanted to get rid of it. So I decided to have a garage sale. And one of the ladies who visited my garage sale walked in and looked at my garage, which was already converted into a gym, and said, "This looks like a dungeon." And I kept that in mind. I thought, wow, I kind of like how that sounds. And then she shared with me, and we immediately bonded over her story, which was she was on a weight loss journey of 100-pound weight loss journey in a year. She was on track. She had lost 50 pounds, but had reached a plateau. And so as I started to share with her what my former career was in the fitness and health industry, and I said, I can help you. I can help you get past that plateau if you were willing to work out with me, because I'm also looking for a workout partner, and we can work out here. She said, absolutely. And in turn, she introduced me to these amazing Signal Hill trails that are nearby. And she says, oh, let's I'll introduce you to that. And I said, absolutely. We bonded immediately. Within a year, she lost 115 pounds. And not only that, she became a beast, like uncontrollable, right? She participated in 3 triathlons with me. She then took it upon herself to participate in Spartan races, the Spartan Beast. She dragged me to this one, Machete Madness. It was crazy. So she took this upon herself, and she just went into beast mode. When we would go to the Signal Hill trails together, she was only walking. And I said, you're going to run this? And she said, no, I'm not. I'm never going to run. And I said, okay, we'll see. And within 5 months, we were running those hills like no tomorrow. And so I saw this amazing metamorphosis occur. And then one person led to another. Like one person told another person, and then people would drive by and say, "Hey, what's going on?" And, "Oh, come join us." And so fast forward, I have about 27 people on my roster right now. So that's how it
So
started.
so incredible. I love that story, and it's just such a great reminder that sometimes people just need to see what's possible and those expanded boundaries of what they can do and what life can look like. But oftentimes we need that inspiration. We need the support from a community. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mission? Because obviously it's grown from that one interaction to now impacting way more people.
So the mission, super simple, is to transform the lives of people in my community and beyond through health and fitness and wellness. Super simple. And that's exactly what's been happening is we are transforming the lives of women. We have some men too. Eventually, though, they kind of fizzle out. And then usually the age group that I have is anywhere between 16 and 60. And some of the ladies bring their daughters, their granddaughters, and it's just been an amazing community. I think I'm going to share this really quick story. One of our ladies that's been around for a long time, her son wasn't feeling well for some time and kept asking, saying, "Something's wrong, Mom." He's 16. And she was trying to, it's just, you probably just not sleeping well, whatever, whatever. Well, it turns out she eventually took him to the doctor and he has leukemia. And he has, it's terminal. And he's currently seeking, they're seeking help at City of Hope. And it has completely turned her life upside down, as you can imagine. Sorry, I get a little emotional because I just saw her yesterday. And we are rallying around her. So it's, yes, is it about fitness? Yes, is it about, do we want aesthetic benefits? Yes. However, now it's really more about quality of life. But take a step further is we are a community of women who rally around each other through good times, bad times. And I'll tell you, that is the missing component in many other locations, is that they don't have this sisterhood, this bond. And actually we coined it the lady gang. So we have a lady gang.
Maria, I'm so glad that we were able to dive into that because your story wouldn't have been complete without that aspect. And as I reflect on this conversation, we started out talking about crucibles and the things in life, the trauma, the challenges that we experience that shape who we are. And then we talked about authentic leadership and how it comes from a place of servant leadership, really caring for other people, living with integrity and compassion, and authenticity, and giving people that space to be who they are. You do that not only in your research and your consulting, but also just through your time, through giving to other people, through Dungeon Fitness. And so you're just, to me, are such a great example of an authentic leader. And it's pretty cool to be able to, hear all these stories, have this conversation, read about your research in this book, but realize that that's who you are. And it comes from such a place of authenticity. So I just so appreciate who you are as a person, your contribution to the world, your commitment to helping people become the best versions of themselves. And I really think that this conversation reflected that. So really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone who has joined this conversation on the WorkReady podcast. Dr. Maria, any final thoughts, and how can people find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn for sure. If you don't mind, you can share my email as well, my contact information. And I think my only parting words is just for the leaders out there is just consider your impact and your influence and how you can change the course of your organization, whether it's, injuries, soft tissue injuries, or any other initiative that you're trying to roll out, is think about the role that you play and how important it is to be an authentic leader and to develop those relationships built on trust. Because I truly believe that if we can focus on that, safety will follow.
Dr. Maria, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
We'll make sure to update the show notes with your information and where people can find you on LinkedIn. Uh,
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I can't even tell you how grateful I am that I've been able to share my story like this. So thank you for giving me that platform.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for tuning into the WorkReady podcast. We're so grateful that you're part of this community. Make sure to like or subscribe, and we've got more conversations coming up. Thank you so much, and stay safe.